What's up, everybody? I'm Owen Neumayer. I'm a senior studying U.S. culture and business practices here at the University of Kentucky. And for my final project for our Philosophy 334 class, I'll be making an informational video essay on a central piece of our class discussion throughout the past month, which is the impermissible purpose of markets. And beyond that, whether or not markets are moral spaces. My video will rely on you, the audience, to be engaged and thoughtful as we go from topic to topic. So I thank you in advance for your time, and here we go. So to begin, I just want to define what a market is and what a market does for the uses of this video. So as we learned in chapter 1 of Deborah Satz, Why Some Things Should Not Be for Sale, a market is a form of an institution in which exchanges take place voluntarily between parties. This basically means that a market is a place in which all parties involved are willingly surrendering something, whether that be a product or compensation for a product. So to really define what I mean by market and product, I find it important to bring in multiple different philosophers and their opinion on the capitalist markets as we know them today. Speaking of philosophers, you may be wondering, who even is Deborah Satz, and why did I just quote her book? Well, that's a great question. Deborah Satz is a professor of philosophy at Stanford University and received 19 honors for awards for her work in philosophy since the late 1970s. And now we're going to go back to the topic. Going back to Satz's argument on markets, still in chapter 1 of Why Some Things Should Not Be for Sale, our author expands upon her simplified definition of markets by adding that markets are social institutions which need to be maintained and sustained by those within it. She also defines market system for the uses of her book and explains that the market system is an abstraction that is supposed to be the link to link the set of all markets, And at the same time, markets are places in which there is no dictator generals or evil masterminds. She even compares players in the market to ants in a colony, as if the market is just a mass of individuals collaborating with one another. Following her explanation of markets, she includes multiple thought-provoking subheadings, including market virtues, efficiency in markets, freedom, and background conditions for the markets linked to efficiency and freedom. It is on the different players in an industry, in a market, to morally carry themselves in a way which is favorable for themselves and others. The concept which can be useful when it comes to the morality of a market is utilitarianism, which is defined and dissected by another one of our philosophers, John Stuart Mill, in his 1879 book titled Utilitarianism. This is dependent on the idea that the best type of actions are those which produce overall happiness and reduce pain and suffering for the highest amount of people. Basically, what Mill is saying is that ideally, moral actions and values will lead to the greatest possible situation for the society as a whole. A universal principle which is important to the argument behind utilitarianism is the fact that every person wants to be happy. If a market is a colony of market players, then are markets places in which people can become happy while also creating an ideal space for everyone else? Or in other words, are markets places for those who seek the common good? The first time we read and dissected this theory in class, it was described as a theory that aims to create the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people. This can be useful when thinking about and expanding on the question of whether or not markets are moral places. Do actions by market players actually yield the greatest amount of good for the most amount of people? This is the question that I will begin to formulate an answer to in this video. When writing on the modern capitalistic economy in his writing, Principles of Political Economy, Book 4, Chapter 6, Mill says the economical advantages of competition are not to be obtained without exposing individuals to the chances of a severe struggle for existence, which is the lot under the system of the great majority of this community. So I know I just threw a lot at you. I read this quote when I first read it as Mill's way of saying that our markets are bound to surrender certain market players to a less enjoyable existence simply because of their place in a society. I also find it interesting how that quote started, using words, the economical advantages of competition. I see this part of the quote as a way of Mill's telling us for someone to have a competitive advantage on another person in a market, another party must suffer. This could be seen as the give and take of an industry. One party prospers and another party settles. Does this sound like a happy situation for all players involved? And what do you know? I forgot to introduce another one of our philosophers. John Stuart Mill lived and thrived in 19th century London, where he was an advocate for schools of philosophy. In his later years, he even became a member of local government in positions such as Chief Examiner of Correspondence, basically the Under Secretary of State, and a member of Parliament in the Westminster Liberal Party. He fought and championed for many causes, including but not limited to the suffrage of women, Irish reform, and the prosecution of governors. Mill dedicated a tremendous amount of his studies to morality and happiness, and was deemed by the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy as the most influential English language philosopher, of the 19th century. After studying him and his life throughout this project research, I can confidently say that he was a very influential English philosopher, and I can see why we studied him 151 years after his death. So shout out Deborah Satz and John Stuart Mill for their tremendous philosophical work. Our next philosopher will be a little more recognizable for you, my viewers. Karl Marx was born in the Rhineland region of Prussia in 1818 and had 8 siblings. As a young man, he attended the universities of Bonn and Berlin to study philosophy and law. He began his career as a radical journalist for a Prussian newspaper from 1842 to 1843. In the years following his first position, Marx began creating pieces on the society around him, many of which he thought would never be published. These are now called his early writings and have been released posthumously. As many people know, likely including you, my viewers, Marx's work has been a very influential piece of philosophy in societies across the globe, including here in America. He has many famous works on the subjects of alienation, history, economics, morality, politics, utopianism, and more. So it is undeniable that Marx has produced some of the most thought-provoking and eye-opening philosophic works out there, and that holds true when he writes on the morality of markets. He never once comes out and offers us a clear explanation of how he feels about the morality of markets, but his work can still offer us very extremely valuable input. A quote from Marx's work comes from Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts of 1844, in which he critiques the wage labor system in our capitalist society. A quote from that writing is as follows: "The worker becomes all the poorer when the more wealth he produces, the more his production increases in power and range. The worker becomes an ever cheaper commodity the more commodities he creates. The devaluation of the human world increases in direct relation with the increase in value of the world of things." While Marx isn't directly saying that markets cause a devaluation of the human world, he is indeed saying that a major piece of our market is causing this. Without the wage labor system in our modern capitalist societal structure, we would have no markets for citizens to even operate in. I believe this quote can help us paint a mental picture of markets and can even help us define them at their core. Are markets simply public institutions where commerce takes place, or are there many more undefined layers within markets? Upon reading this, I see the end of this quote as the most important piece of it. The devaluation of the human world increases in direct relation with the increase in the value of the world of things. This quote comes from writings nearly 180 years ago, yet Marx knows that the structure of our markets and economy do have negative consequences. As more wealth is accrued for those at the top, more negative effects fall on those who reside at the bottom of our societies. So does this sound morally just to you? Because in all honesty, it doesn't really sound that way to me.
Nope.
Now we're going to go back to present day with some of Deborah Satz's work on the purpose of markets. So in Why Some Things Should Not Be for Sale, Satz discusses moral dilemmas within certain markets and industries. As discussed in class, she highlights 2 virtues that are commonly associated with markets. 1 is their link to efficiency, and 2 is their link to liberty. So I have been broadly considering the morality and overall purpose of markets. It must be denoted that there are an immeasurable amount of markets for the products in circulation in the American economy. Satz argues that each of these markets has unique ethical considerations and nuances. In each separate market, we're reliant on the state to define our property rights and to protect the things we own and cherish. And without clearly defined property rights, we would lack safety and the reassurance that the actions of market players will be moral, and more importantly, those actions will be legal. And because of this, we can confidently assert that the state and the market must rely on each other. So another major topic for Satz in her most famous work, Why Some Things Should Not Be for Sale, is the freedom of markets. So this is where today's point of contention, whether or not markets are moral, gets a little tricky. At their core, markets are free spaces. All consumers in a market can choose which market to interact with. They can exchange their payment or products at will, and they can always exit the market as they choose. These few facts basically mean that consumers and producers have the option to do whatever is best for their own self-interest. Now you may be thinking, what cost does the self-interest of a market player come at? In the readings from Marx, it sounded obvious that there is a give and take in our markets, correct? This optimal self-interest could very well come at the cost of whomever is tasked with making a product being bought and sold, or maybe even at the cost of those who are selling the product. But that is just an idea for you to consider. I personally see Satz's opinion on markets being a mutual site of self-interest as a powerful contention point to Marx's critique of the labor wage system which makes up our markets. If markets are inherently free, and if the participants of a market are protected by the government, then how bad could markets really be? Now you may be asking yourself, why does Owen Neumayer keep referencing Deborah Satz's work, titled Why Some Things Should Not Be for Sale? I wonder why it's called that, you may be asking yourself. My response to you would be, what a great question. What a great question. Deborah Satz mentions morality, the purpose and structure of markets, and how our markets affect individuals in the greater community. Yet her main point is to argue why markets should not be completely free and open for the exchange of anything and everything. Something that she argues, that should not be for sale in any way are human bodies. The selling and commodification of a human in any way is frowned upon in her writings, and I see her reasoning as very valid and humane. She sees the selling of one's body sexually via organ donation or in any form of surrogacy as a way of demeaning oneself in such a way that you are making the human body less than what it is. Our body is not something that is separate from who we are. It is a part of what makes us what we are. By selling your body for sexual purposes, for example, you are allowing yourself to commodify your body, therefore labeling it as something that is separate from what you are, almost as if it is some other thing. We are not just a soul within a body that has nothing to do with our soul. We are one cohesive being that is extremely valuable. This is Satz's way of describing what a market is actually good for. A market should not be used to regulate the selling of one's body. Another market which is frowned upon in her writings is the market of child labor. Now, I personally don't really think I need to dive into why child labor is bad, and I feel as though all of my viewers can agree that the advertisement and allowance of child labor is an extremely immoral act. Satz's overarching argument as to why something should not be for sale has helped me conduct my research and further buttress the claim that markets truly can be an immoral space. So now we're going to jump back to one of the most popular philosophers in history himself, Karl Marx. As we studied in class via Marx's estranged labor, the modern capitalist society we live in fosters a sort of labor which is unlike any other. Even in the 19th century, Marx knew that major corporations and large business structures force low-level employees to not feel true satisfaction from their work. Workers begin to feel unvalued and like cogs in a corporate machine under this work. He breaks down these types of alienation into 4 subcategories: alienation from a product, from labor itself, from others, and from the self. We broke down these types of alienation in class, and I found the one type which relates most to the subject matter is alienation from the self. The labor that goes into the creation of products which are sold in our modern societies can be a key piece of information for us to use in answering the questions surrounding the morality of markets. If workers can become to feel detached or separated from their own self in life, is this capitalist structure worth it? Now, by no means am I recommending that we change our societal structure from capitalist to socialist or any other structure. I simply provoke thought in my viewers by asking this question. Not only does estranged labor help us further define the market system, but it also helps us answer the question, are markets moral spaces? So now that we have discussed, summarized, dissected work from the likes of Satz, Mills, and Marx, I feel as though I've given you, my viewer, a solid platform in order to formulate your own opinion and answer to the question of whether or not markets are moral. We definitely have taken a deep dive at what inherently makes up a market, what a market is good for, but the last thing we must do is answer the aforementioned question. So what do I, the creator of this video essay, think? I think that markets are good and bad. As I touched on briefly, there are an immeasurable amount of markets and things to be commodified. Is it my responsibility to determine whether or not these markets are moral? No. Actually, I suppose that was the entire purpose and creation of this video essay, but still you get my point. There are many great markets such as skincare and beauty. Everyone wants to look good after all. This is true. There's caffeinated drink markets, like this one here, which keep me going when creating video essays and studying for finals. Or maybe even subscription streaming services such as Netflix. I love a good documentary after a long day's work, I do indeed. But There are also some very immoral and bad markets. The market of sex work, for example, goes against just about every traditional belief system. So it is a very bad and negative market, no matter what you may think or say. The market of child labor is also an example of a very immoral and frowned upon market, as it should be. So these markets, among many others, just prove that there can be good and bad markets. But as I said, it is not my sole responsibility to make that decision for you. I was just your tour guide through philosophy for the day. So thank you for joining me on this ride. Please like, subscribe, and comment your favorite part of the video. Until next time.